Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Taking a break from the NBA Finals coverage that we've been doing for the past couple of weeks because the NBA never sleeps, and just because there is an NBA Finals going on and a couple days between games doesn't mean there's not some massive news going on in the association. And that was the case today, Sap, as reports are indicating what a lot of people thought might happen, in that Dame Lillard is about to officially request a trade from the Portland Trail Blazers. This is coming via Henry Abbott of True Hoop, who says, quote, "A source close to Lillard says that in the days to come, he plans to request a trade." So it hasn't happened yet, but I mean, it seems like the wheels are in motion. Probably just hasn't happened because Dame is with Team USA in Las Vegas and hasn't had a chance to talk to Neil Olshey, the president of the Blazers, and formally sort of get this thing done. But Sap, it did almost seem like the writing was on the wall a couple weeks ago when fans, I put that in quotation marks, were tweeting at Dame Lillard about the Chauncey Billups hire and giving him a hard time about it, that he was getting frustrated. So are you surprised that it's come to this, Sap?
No, not at all. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago. In the process of hiring Chauncey Billups, there was some pushback by fans in Portland, people in Portland, because of Billups' rape allegations back in 1997. And in the meantime, it appeared that Dame Lillard was on board with Chauncey Billups being the next coach of the Blazers. He also had supported some other coaches. So the fans, who oftentimes don't think, and I don't even know if it was fans, it may have just been other people in Portland that aren't necessarily fans, but are, active socially, so justice warriors, whatever the case may be, decided that they were going to push back against Dame Lillard, who's the biggest star in Portland by far. And I think it kind of turned him off for that. Now, I hope that's not the reason he's requesting a trade or is going to request a trade, because, these things happen from time to time in certain locations. And if there's 20 people on Twitter attacking you, you can't hold the whole fan base responsible for that. But I just think at this point, Dame Lillard realizes that there's really no mechanism for the Trailblazers to get that much better. They're not going to recruit free agents. They're always good enough to make the postseason, but not bad enough to be in the draft lottery and get a really good young player. So they're in no man's land, which is the worst place to be in the NBA. So he's looking at his legacy. He's a great player. I think he's one of the top 10 players in the league. And he's at this point saying, look, I'm turning 31 years old, which I think he did just the other day. And it's time to try to win a championship somewhere. It's not going to happen in Portland. We'll see where he ends up next year. But this is not a surprise whatsoever.
Yeah, so he signed an extension last year, and so he hasn't even begun his extension technically. So the Blazers, it's an interesting circumstance because obviously he's, I think, the most popular player in franchise history. You could make a case he's the greatest player in Blazers franchise history. He also is now, like I just said, under contract. So typically when a star wants out, we've seen they have maybe 2 years left on their deal at most. He has 4.
Right.
So the Blazers aren't going to be they will slow play this, I'm assuming, Sap, and try to probably change his mind first and foremost, because they don't have to rush and scramble to. I don't think he's a guy who'll say, I'm just not going to play, I'll hold out. We haven't really seen that in the NBA, or show up out of shape like James Harden did last year. So if there's whenever your star requests a trade, it's bad for the team, obviously. But if there's any saving grace for the Blazers, is they do have time to figure this out and get the best deal possible. And also they have time to try to potentially change his mind if they want to go that route, Sap. So it's a little bit of a different circumstance than the Anthony Davis situation we saw a couple years ago, or even the James Harden circumstance that we saw last year, because of the contract situation. And then you have to talk about also, obviously every team would want Dame Lillard, but not every team has the ability or the timeline that matches up to be able to acquire Dame Lillard. So I don't necessarily know that this is going to play out. I wouldn't say definitively today that he's 100% going to get traded from Portland. I usually, when the star asks for a trade, you can write it down in permanent marker. He's going to get traded. But because of the contract status, because of his significance to Portland, and because of the market, I don't necessarily know that this is a foregone conclusion.
Isn't it easier to trade him, though, with 4 years left on his contract, where you can look to a team and say, look, we want a lot in return for Dame Lillard. He's one of the 10 best players in the league. He could put several teams over the top. Say if he goes to Philadelphia or pick any other franchise that he'd go to, he'd make them instant contenders, or at least maybe even put them over the top. But he's got 4 years left on that contract. So that's a really good commodity to trade. Now, maybe when he gets traded, they look to extend him. I'm not sure how all of that works. That becomes very complicated. But if he's got that many years left on his contract, that's a very, very important part of this, right? I mean, when James Harden decided he wanted out of Houston, he had 2 years left in his contract. That's better than just 1 year on his contract. And the same thing happened with Kyrie Irving when he wanted out of Cleveland. The Celtics knew they had 2 years to get him and try to convince him to stay there, which didn't work out. I think James Harden's more likely to stay in Brooklyn than certainly Kyrie Irving was likely to stay in Boston. This is very, very interesting with all of this. Then you factor in he's 31. He's a smaller guard. I don't see him being an effective player at 36 or 37, but I still see him being an effective player for the next 2 to 3 years. And again, the way the NBA works, Jet, I think you have to strike when things are hot. I mean, if you're a team like, say, Philadelphia, and you think you're a Dame Lillard away from being a championship team, and if it means you have to give up Ben Simmons and something else, and you think that Dame Lillard and Joel Embiid will put you over the top, you go ahead and do it. We saw what Toronto did a couple of years ago. They knew there was a real strong possibility they were only going to have Kawhi Leonard for 1 year, but they did it and they won a championship, and now they're retooling. So I think it's going to happen. The only way it may not happen is I think Chauncey Billups may have to be the peacemaker, right? The person who comes in and talks Dame Lillard into staying, and that they'll have a good relationship. I think he likes Chauncey Billups. It's just he was turned off by the blowback he received because he supported Chauncey Billups. Well, Billups
Right.
is now the coach. We'll see if they can mend fences there. I just appears to me that Dame Lillard's at the point like it's time for me to win a championship, and it ain't going to happen here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's certainly that's the lead frustration there, and it's hard to win a championship at a smaller market team.
Mhm.
It's just not something that happens all that often in the NBA, and Lillard's been incredibly loyal and vocal about that. So this is sort of a different part of his. He's almost veering off into a different part of a brand now that we're expecting of Dame Lillard. You just expect him to be this super, super loyal guy,
Right.
Mr. Blazer, and now we'll see if his reputation takes a hit, if fans turn on him. I think that'll depend on the destination. Again, I'm because of all these external factors, Sap, I'm not going to say definitively, yeah, he's 100% going to get traded, because I don't think Portland obviously doesn't want to trade him. And
Mhm.
because of the years left on his deal, yes, that has them operating in more of a position of strength typically than teams who are hit with trade requests. But still, they prefer to just keep the guy, so they can slow play this and try to convince him. And I do think because he is so loyal to Portland, he would be somewhat receptive to maybe Chauncey Billups' message and maybe a trade that they make to try to help him out if they trade McCollum, and maybe they get a little bit better. I don't know, but I'll operate on the assumption that he does get traded, Sap, just for the sake of argument. I'm glad you mentioned the 76ers because they seem like the most logical trade partner. I've been, since I saw this request, I've been on my
Mhm.
ESPN trade machine, as I like to do. And we talked about this, Sap, midway through the playoffs. The Lillard for Simmons swap would make sense for both teams. But because of how poor Ben Simmons played in the postseason and how great Dame Lillard played in the postseason, Portland wouldn't be amenable for a 1-to-1 swap, even with Lillard requesting a trade. So you'd have to look at what else can Philadelphia put in there to make it worth Portland's while, or to one up an offer that another team's going to come up with for Dame Lillard. So I do think that the bare bones of a Lillard and Simmons swap is probably makes the most sense, but Philadelphia is going to have to kick in more to make that worth Portland's while.
Would it be Matisse Thybulle and maybe a draft pick or two to make this thing work? I mean, Dame Lillard's a better player than Ben Simmons. He's also 7 years older. Ben Simmons is 9 inches taller, has incredible potential, but seems to be stagnant at this point in his career. And you're also, if you're Portland, you're trading the face of the franchise. You think he's maybe the best player in Blazers history. I think he's the most popular player in Blazers history. I think Clyde Drexler was better, and certainly Bill Walton, when he was healthy, was better, but I'm not going to go into that. But now if you're trading Dame Lillard, who seems to be a guy who kind of embraces all of that, for a sourpuss and Ben Simmons, now you have to kind of sell him as the face of the franchise.
Exactly.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. I mean, Ben Simmons, he's just kind of a unique guy. We've questioned if he really loves basketball. He doesn't seem to be a guy that's going to embrace being the face of the franchise, where Dame Lillard has been that guy, right? And I think if Dame was to go to Philadelphia with Joel Embiid, they'd be instant title contenders. I think they play great together. You know, the great guard with the great center. I mean, they could really put together a nice run in Philadelphia. So you'd have to get more than just Ben Simmons, Matisse Thybulle, who's a really good defensive player, maybe some draft picks. I mean, but you're also flipping your franchise from being a really good offensive team with a poor defense. All of a sudden, Ben Simmons and Thybulle would make you a really good defensive team. So you have to kind of sell that to your fan base as well. So Philadelphia does make a lot of sense. Look, there's probably 15 teams that are like trying to figure out a way to get Dame Lillard, whether it's the Celtics. Just pick any team you want. The Lakers are probably trying to make something happen, although it's nearly impossible because of the contract.
Yeah, they'd have to trade Anthony Davis. That's the only one.
Right, and that's not going to happen.
Blazers
I mean, the Celtics
and the Blazers won't trade him to the Lakers. Period.
They won't. I mean, most likely they'll trade him to the Eastern Conference. So you're talking Philadelphia, you're talking the Celtics. So that's going to include Jaylen Brown and something else, right? Along those lines. I know Golden State's been thrown out there. Like, that would be kind of an interesting team. Obviously, Steph Curry, Dame Lillard, and Klay Thompson, like, they'd score a lot of points and shoot really well, but they wouldn't defend really well other than Klay. I mean, they'd be in a lot of 130 to 127 games, and they could send James Wiseman, Andrew Wiggins, so the contracts kind of work, and they have the 7th and 14th pick in what's supposed to be a pretty deep draft. So that could work, but does Portland really want to go trade Dame Lillard to Golden State? I think what Portland, if they're going to trade him, has to do is just get the best deal possible, because they're probably going to, sink after trading Dame Lillard. So go get the best package you can get. Sometimes if it means trading him to within your own conference, go ahead and do that. I'm going to throw one other wild team in there. There's probably like a 1% chance that this could happen. Could you see a swap of Dame Lillard for Kyrie Irving?
Yes.
I mean, that to me makes some sense, right? Because
I think that the Nets would do it in a heartbeat. I think the Blazers would be very trepidatious about doing it.
I mean, Kyrie's a tough nut to crack, right?
Yeah, I think that if that's what the Blazers wanted to do, that's probably the best individual player they could get in a sort of a 1-for-1 trade. But man, would that piss Kyrie off, for one. I don't know what Durant's, if he would be upset or if he would like it. I don't know what the deal is, but yet Brooklyn would do it in a heartbeat. They wouldn't even question it. Portland would be like, our team is already in tough shape. This guy could completely take a blowtorch to it.
He might retire. I mean, Kyrie Irving could get traded, play like 3 weeks and retire. And then what's Portland going to do? They essentially would have given away one of the 10 best players in basketball for a guy that you can't rely on. I mean, if Kyrie Irving,
might not show up.
He may not even show up. Right. It may just be like, where is Portland? I know the earth's flat. Where is it? Where do I go? Other than he knows that, Beaverton, Oregon's close there, and the Nike connection, who knows? But that makes the most sense, because Kyrie and Dame are very similar as players. I mean, I'm not going to get in a discussion who I think is better. I think at his peak, Kyrie's even better than Dame Lillard, but Dame Lillard is a professional. He's durable. He's dependable. Those are 3 things that Kyrie Irving is not. So I think you see the difference there. That would be a fascinating trade. Maybe the Nets would have to give a little bit more to get Dame Lillard, because he is reliable, dependable, and an adult, so they may have to give more than Kyrie Irving. What about if the Bucks were to lose in the NBA Finals? Would they look at maybe Chris Middleton and some other things for Dame Lillard? I don't know. Wouldn't get it done. No, because Middleton's a really nice player, but this is the biggest asset Portland has by far. If they're going to trade him, they better make it happen. They better make it count so that they can start to rebuild, or at least even stay relevant.
Yeah, it's a young all-star. And a player with potential and picks. That's probably that's what they want. how many teams can offer that? Not all that many. The Knicks have had their name floated out there, but the Knicks, if you look at their roster, they were a nice story this year. Their roster is still kind of dog crap, and
Yeah.
I don't know if they have anything of real substance to offer the Blazers outside of RJ Barrett, who I don't know what his ceiling is necessarily. If he's a player that has
Yeah.
all-star potential, even if the Knicks want to get, and then the Knicks are just built around Randall and Lillard, and then it's basically the same thing that they have going on in Portland. They're a first
Yeah.
round or second round exit. Um,
That's a lateral move for Dame Lillard, right? He goes from being a 5 or 6 seed in the West to being a 5 or 6 seed in the East, and doesn't really have a better chance to win a championship.
Except the team that I've sort of identified to me as a trade partner that I think could work is the Pelicans. I don't know if
Mm.
Lillard has any interest in going there, but a Brandon Ingram and some of their other young pieces, and they have picks too for Lillard swap. Maybe both teams are interested in that. Ingram is young and has
Mm.
obviously all-star potential. Maybe pairing Zion with Lillard is granted it shortens the window a little bit because Ingram's much younger. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's something the Pelicans are interested in doing. I think Portland would be open to that because Ingram's that sort of wing scorer that every team looks for, and it works out salary cap wise. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe the Pelicans are interested in that. That just all depends on how they view the risk reward of getting a guy who's 31 to pair with Zion who's 22.
Yeah, that's always difficult, but I think at some point teams have to kind of get through all of that and say, we've got a chance to get Dame Lillard, one of the 10 best players in the league. Let's go do it. And let's kind of take a leap of faith and expect that can work with Dame Lillard and Zion Williamson. That's why I think Masai Ujiri is the best executive in the sport, because when he made that trade for Kawhi Leonard 3 years ago, it was like, boy, this is kind of risky because we know Kawhi is a little bit flaky. He's only got 1 year left on his contract. He's probably going to play elsewhere. They traded DeMar DeRozan, who was arguably the most popular player in Raptors history, right? And other pieces. And it's like, this isn't going to work. And then, 10 months later, they're hoisting the championship trophy. So I think sometimes you just got to go do it. That's why I'll even throw the Celtics into the fray. It would be Jaylen Brown and something else to get you Dame Lillard. Now, I'm not a big fan of trading Jaylen Brown because he's 24 and I think he's an ascending player. And the only question I have with Dame Lillard is he's 31. He's a smaller guard. He's not a small guard. He's bigger than Isaiah Thomas. He's bigger than Kemba Walker, but he's not much bigger than those guys. He's about 6'1", 6'2"
Right.
max, well put together. He's not a thin guy, but we've seen so many times where those 6'1" guards, once they get to 33, 34, they're not quite the same. I mean, Chris Paul's been able to maintain a high level of play, and he's 36, but he plays kind of a different game than Dame Lillard. So that's the only concern I would have. I mean, as a Celtics guy, would you trade Jaylen Brown and say Marcus Smart straight up for Dame Lillard?
I mean, I love Dame Lillard, and I do think obviously he's a better player than Jaylen Brown. But unless I feel very confident that it's a core that can win me a championship, I'm not pulling the trigger on trading Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum because you still need that third guy, and then you
Right.
have no real mechanism to doing it. Is Jason Tatum and Damian Lillard better than Dame Lillard and CJ McCollum? Yeah, it's definitely better than that. But is it better than Milwaukee's team right now, or Brooklyn's team, or even Philadelphia? I'm not convinced of that. So because I don't think that's a good move for the Celtics. If they could get Lillard without trading Brown or Tatum, then it's a no-brainer. But you need the three guys really, and that sort of takes away the Celtics have no real ability to add a third guy after that too. So does it make them better for one season, maybe 2 seasons? Yeah, but does it get them to the finals? I would say probably not. So I would not do that if I was the Celtics, Sap. And maybe I sound crazy because obviously Lillard's a superior player to Brown. I mean, I'm not kidding myself into thinking anything otherwise, but I still think Brown has room to grow and get better as a player. I think Lillard is at his best and probably for the next year or two. But Tatum is so young, and there's a lot of young guys on the team. I just don't know if that makes sense for the Celtics to do. It's a big swing, but if you're going to take a big swing, you got to make sure that there's a high likelihood that it's going to end up in a finals appearance. And I
Well,
don't think that that's what's going to happen.
this is where the Celtics blew it when they had all that draft capital and they couldn't put it together to get a legitimate
100%.
star. That's just what happened in 2007. You had Paul Pierce. You were able to take all your assets and trade it for Kevin Garnett, and then you were able to take the 5th pick in the draft and flip it for Ray Allen. That's what you were able to do. The Celtics had opportunities to do that because they had some really good draft capital, and they weren't able to parlay that into someone else. So now they're stuck with not even on a first-round pick this year, and they have Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, which is tremendous. That's an outstanding young duo. But what's the mechanism to get that third guy? I mean, it's not Al Horford. He's going to be a role player. It's not Evan Fournier if they bring him back. It's not Marcus Smart. It's not, Robert Williams III. These are all role players, niche players, a legitimate third star. That's what you need to get. And you really have no way of bringing someone here unless someone's totally disgruntled and says, I want to go to Boston. And that's kind of what James Harden did. James Harden did it with Brooklyn, but that's because they have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. That's what James Harden wanted to do. Right. I mean, if you had a disgruntled star, if Dame Lillard put up a stink and said, I want out and I want to go to Boston, maybe something could happen. And maybe, Jason Tatum's trying to recruit Dame Lillard right now because they're playing on the Olympic team together. Although I still don't believe Jason Tatum could recruit anyone. I don't picture him as a salesman, right? I mean, he just doesn't seem to have that in his.
Well, his kids seem to get along with Damian Lillard's kids. They've been playing at the Olympics. So that's nice.
Deuce, I think Deuce is a better salesman than
He
Jason
might be.
Tatum.
He might
Oh,
be.
Deuce could recruit anybody. I'd go play for the Celtics to hang out with Deuce. That is the coolest 3-year-old in the country. Absolutely. But Jason Tatum doesn't strike me as the guy that's, going to be behind the scenes putting deals together a la LeBron James. He just doesn't have that type of personality. He's kind of very laconic and, sometimes doesn't seem to really even have a heartbeat. I worry more that Tatum is being recruited by other guys at, the Olympic.
Yeah, I agree with you.
At the Olympic right now where they're, playing in Vegas and then eventually when they go to Tokyo. And at some point, Jed, I think you and I might be on the U.S. Olympic team because, they're dropping like flies and bringing in guys that I'd never heard of or, still can't believe are in the league.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the Olympics in a second. Yeah, but I agree with you. I think Tatum is more susceptible to being recruited than to recruiting.
Yeah.
Sap, if I'm looking also, at the landscape, just a couple more teams that I think that obviously every team wants Dame Lillard. We can just throw that out.
Sure.
Of course you want him. Teams that I think the team that would be the most desperate to try to get him is Dallas.
Yes.
I don't think that they have the mechanism to do it, unfortunately. But of all the teams that want him, I think they would want him the most, if that makes sense.
Man, could you picture Dame Lillard and Luka? Oh my
Most
Lord.
teams need 3 guys, Sap. When you have a player the caliber of Luka, you can get by with 2, like LeBron did last year with just him and Anthony Davis.
Because he's a force multiplier. Because he not only can get his 30, he can also get you 10 assists, right? So that's what makes him such a unique player.
Right, and Lillard, I think, makes his teammates better too. So you have 2 of those guys who do that. If Dallas had any mechanism to do that, they would trade. They'd literally say, whatever picks you want, whatever players not named Luka Doncic on the team, take anything you want.
Yep.
I think that's the team that would throw. If they could, they'd throw 100 picks at it because they would just. That could work. That could win you a championship. Those 2 guys.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and Porzingis isn't really enough for Portland to want. Yeah, I mean, he's another guy.
Negative value, maybe.
Exactly. Porzingis and Simmons probably had the worst postseason of any players, right? I mean, their value went down. I think Paul George's value went up, right? Yeah. Because look at what he did. He got his team to the Western Conference Finals, Game 6, without Kawhi Leonard for half of the playoffs. So I think his value went up. In fact, talking about Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, do the Clippers have any real possibility of getting Dame Lillard? They would probably have to trade Paul George, right?
Yeah, straight up for Dame Lillard. 2 guys, yeah.
And is that's kind of a lateral move? I mean, I think Dame Lillard's one of the 10 best players in the league. I think Paul George is one of the 15 best players in the league. And Paul George is a little bit younger. He gives you more on the defensive end, obviously. So I don't even know how that works out. And then you also got to figure out what the hell Kawhi Leonard's going to do. Is he going to opt in for another year? Is he going to opt in for a long-term deal with the Clippers? Is he going to go elsewhere to play? Is he going to join the circus? I mean, he and Kyrie Irving are 2 guys they're marvelous talents, but you just can't quite get your your arms around them and figure out what the hell they're going to do. Kyrie talks too much and
Right.
Kawhi doesn't talk enough. And like Kyrie says a lot of things and makes no sense. And Kawhi is like, chief in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He doesn't speak till the final 20 minutes of the movie. So it's going to be a fantastic offseason because you've got a legitimate stud that apparently wants out of Portland, and you're going to have every team in the league is going to be, trying to figure out a way to get him.
Let me throw out two last scenarios for you, Seth.
Okay.
Miami, an Adebayo for Lillard, not straight up swap because, again, that's not good enough for Lillard. Adebayo and Hero and maybe a pick.
Yeah, that could be, right?
Is that something that either team would be interested in? Miami, that would be Miami saying, we have like about a 2-year window to get this thing done and win a championship.
Yeah. I mean, and look, what happens if Kawhi opts out of the Clippers and decides to sign as a free agent with Miami Heat? Now there's a super team, right?
Yeah.
Damian Lillard, Kawhi, Jimmy Butler. That could be the best team in basketball. It could also blow up a little bit because of Kawhi's not being a really communicative guy, and then obviously Jimmy Butler is kind of his own guy. But that would be very, very interesting. Look, I think almost every player in the league would like to play in Miami. No state income tax, great climate, good culture. Pat Riley, it's kind of a cool organization to play for. So that's a possibility. I mean, Tyler
would you
Hero,
do it if you're Miami? If without the guarantee of Kawhi, would you swap?
Yeah,
Adebayo
I would, because
for
these teams
Lillard?
like Miami are like stuck in no man's land. Like, is Jimmy Butler, Bam, and Tyler Hero and whatever else they got there, are they going to beat a healthy Brooklyn team? No, they got swept by the Bucks this year. And I know this was a weird season, so let's, factor that in as well, because Miami did go to the finals last year and had a really short off season. So, but that team's not beating anybody, right? I mean, maybe they'll win one round in the playoffs. They're not going to beat Milwaukee, Brooklyn, or even Philadelphia if Philadelphia gets their act together. I mean, even Atlanta's better than Miami at this point, I think. So, yeah, I mean, if you can get Dame Lillard for Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, draft picks, that's a possibility. And we know that Pat Riley is ready, willing, and able to make these types of deals. He's not a guy that stands idly. I don't think Pat Riley at this point in his career is really pleased being the 6 or 7 seed in the Eastern Conference. He'd like to win another title where people can say, well, he only won titles with Magic, Kareem, Shaq, Wade, and LeBron. Which that's no knock against Pat Riley, because name the executive or coach that won titles without great players. It just doesn't happen. I mean, maybe we could throw Larry Brown out there with the 04 Pistons, but that type of thing happens like every 20 years in the NBA, or Lenny Wilkins winning in 79 with the Sonics, where their best player was Dennis Johnson, their only real Hall of Famer. So yeah, I mean, it happens every 20, 25 years. So, I mean, but I think these guys always want to kind of prove themselves. I think Popovich is trying to do that now in San Antonio. Hey, I can win a title without Tim Duncan. Well, apparently you can't. Bill Belichick's trying to prove he can win a Super Bowl without Tom Brady. Well, apparently you can't. It's still a players' league, whether it be basketball or football. So, yeah, Miami certainly would be in play. You could throw almost any team out there, Jed, and it would make sense to me, because who the hell doesn't want Dame Lillard? The most fun one is Golden State, right? Because they have a lot of assets there, right? Wiseman, Wiggins, because of the contract, the 7th and the 14th pick. But would that would be the most entertaining team in the history of the NBA, right? Lillard, Curry, and Klay Thompson. Like, but would it win? I mean,
I don't know. And no one knows what Klay Thompson's going to be like after,
but let's say Klay comes back
competitive basketball in 3 years.
Geez, I think since the Carter administration, it feels like. But that would be a wildly entertaining team. Man, you'd have 3 of the top 4 shooters in the NBA. I mean, I'm not being hyperbolic there. Those 3 and Kevin Durant, to me, the 4 best shooters in the league. I know you could throw Joe Harris in, but Joe Harris isn't in that class. I mean, that would be quite fun to watch. Klay plays really good defense. You'd have Draymond as like the bouncer at the nightclub, and you could go find veterans that would drool to go play in that situation. That would be absolutely wild. And the thing is,
it'd be very small. It
would be very small, but man, would that be entertaining? I mean, every 13-year-old kid would be following the Golden State Warriors. They kind of already do because of Steph, but then you throw Dame into it, because Dame's very popular with the young kids as well, because he's not a big guy. He's exciting to watch. That would be fascinating to watch. And they may have more assets than anybody, Jet, because they have the 7th and 14th pick in this draft, which is supposed to be a pretty good draft.
Yeah, and I guess
then
it depends what you think of James Wiseman. I don't know
that's the X factor.
if a team is high on him, then yeah, it makes sense. If they think he's sort of a basketball dinosaur, then maybe not so much.
And Andrew Wiggins, because of the contract,
we've barely seen the guy play, Sap. I mean, he played 2 games of college basketball and then was hurt after like 14 games of the NBA. So
I mean, is he going to be Greg Odom, like a big guy that can't stay healthy? Because those big guys, when they start to deal with injuries, they don't generally get healthy. Like Bill Walton, we mentioned him for the second time now in this podcast, one of the greatest players of all time, but could not stay healthy. The big guys, when they deal with injuries, it's not like you all of a sudden after 3 or 4 years of dealing with this, you become, AC Green as far as being durable. Those injuries kind of stay with you the rest of your career. But the interesting thing is Portland going to look to get like 4 things back in return, which you can kind of look at and say, okay, we get the 7th pick, the 14th pick. Wiggins is a nice player. Wiseman could be a good player. So we get 4 assets. If we can hit on 2 or 3 of them, we can be relevant pretty quickly. You know what I'm saying? Whereas if it's kind of a 2-for-1 deal and something doesn't work out and all of a sudden it becomes a 1-for-1 trade with Dame Lillard and you're going to lose that one unless, again, it's the Nets sending Kyrie Irving to Portland, but then you're dealing with, a flake who you don't know if is going to show up to play.
Right. Well, let me ask you this, Sap. Do you think Portland's going to be at all deferential to where they send Lillard in terms of what he wants? Could a team like, I'll just throw a random one out there, Cleveland, they have a bunch of young players and picks.
They do.
They're not good. Could they package, Colin Sexton and whatever pick? I think they have the 3rd pick this year, and Okoro, who they took a bunch of young players, and say, hey, we really need to start a market to get people to, we're not necessarily going to win a championship, but we need somebody to be able to market. And they offer what would be the best package to Lillard, but it would be kind of a crap team that they're sending Lillard to. Do you think Portland would be interested in doing that, or will they show some deference to Dame Lillard and try to send him to a team that he has a chance to compete for?
Since it's not a free agent destination, Portland, they just got to go get the best deal they can. If it means Cleveland, then so be it. I mean, you've got to be at times cutthroat. I mean, if you're a free agent destination, you may want to show a lot of love to Dame Lillard because we know how close the players are in the NBA. If you appease him, then you get good marks for the Portland Trailblazers and they can go get a free agent or 2 down the road, but it doesn't seem to be a destination. It did kind of work against Danny Ainge, the way he handled Isaiah Thomas, that a lot of players in the league were turned off by that. Right. So that is something that you kind of have to juggle. Hey, here's a theory. I mean, we're just spitballing all sorts of nonsense out here today. Why not? It's Friday, and there's this big gap between, games 4 and 5 in the NBA Finals. If he goes to Cleveland and LeBron decides to go back to Cleveland, wrap up his career with the Cavaliers and Dame Lillard, who the hell knows? I mean, anything's possible. I sound like Kevin Garnett, but that would be another wild scenario. Why not?
There's a lot of smart teams, obviously, but there's also dumb teams. And I'm not saying acquiring Dame Lillard is dumb. He's a great player. But, I do think that there's teams that would say we need to get asses in seats. And we will be willing to try to fast forward on our rebuild or punt the rebuild to get Dame Lillard in here and get asses in seats, even though we won't realistically be competing for a championship. That would all suck for Dame Lillard, but that's sort of the advantage that what Portland would want to take advantage of.
Right.
Like we talked about the Rockets a couple of times this season and the bath that Tillman Fertitta, their owner, took during the pandemic because he was in the restaurant industry. Could they package? They have 1 million picks now, Sap. Could they package those picks? They have the 2nd pick in the draft this year, some other young players, and say, we desperately need some attraction to try to recoup some of this money that I lost. Could they be in the mix for Dame Lillard? Because I don't think of him as a particularly brilliant basketball mind. Could they be in the mix for something like that? It would be foolish for the Rockets to do something like that because it doesn't put them anywhere near championship contention.
No.
But could a team be so desperate to say, we need an attraction here to be able to put fans in seats and then make the move?
Yeah, it's a real possibility because Fertitta did take a bath during the pandemic. I mean, I think he lost a big portion of his fortune, and that will affect what he does running his basketball team, which he paid close to $2 billion for. It's not as if he just inherited the team or bought it 35 years ago. I mean, he laid out a lot of cash for that team. And then you had James Harden kind of lay down on the job. You had to move him, and now you're arguably the worst roster in the NBA, but you do have a lot of those draft picks. And at that point, it's almost like, come see Dame lead the league in scoring. They kind of had that with James Harden for a few years, but the difference is with James Harden, they were able to win because they had some other players with him, right? You had Chris Paul for a few years, Westbrook for 1 year,
Dwight Howard.
Capella was a nice player, Dwight Howard. Yeah, so they had some nice role players, Eric Gordon, PJ Tucker. They built a team that actually probably would have won the title in 2018 if Chris Paul doesn't get hurt in Game 5 of the Western Conference Finals.
This was pre-Fertitta, though, remember. He was not the owner
That's right.
of that team.
He wasn't the owner of that, yeah. So here he comes along, and it's been nothing but bad stuff for him, right? So, with your star kind of just, falling asleep on the job and forcing a trade out there, and now you're stuck with not much in the way of assets. So what about even Oklahoma City? Oklahoma City has what, 17 or 18 first round picks over the next 7 years. I mean, they could package a bunch of them to Portland and say, okay, Dame's our guy here. It's a good basketball market. But again, does Dame want to go, okay, I'm leaving Portland to go to Oklahoma City. I'm going to be in the same situation, and I'm going to lead the league in scoring, which is nice. But what the hell does that do for my legacy? Because he wants to win a title. I mean, I think
so that's why the trade is it's never going to be that simple, because he's going to want to go to only a few specific teams.
Exactly.
And there's only, of those specific teams, there's only maybe one or two that have the actual reasonable assets to make a trade work. So, we think of when the star requests a trade, okay, there's going to be, naturally, it's going to change the power balance of the NBA because it's going to form some sort of super team. But in a situation like this, especially with a guy under contract, all these teams, remember, we're kind of in uncharted territory, have been hurting financially. Yep. And if they don't have a product they think that can recoup some of that money, they might just say, we're not going to sit and be patient for a 5-6 year rebuild here. Let's get a guy who will sell jerseys and sell tickets. So I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that he goes to a team that he necessarily wants to go to and becomes a title contender. And if that's the case, Sap, he might rescind the trade request and saying, whoa, I don't want to go to Oklahoma City. I'll just stay here in Portland, if you don't mind.
Well, that's why I think that question you asked is a very important question. Will Portland say, Dame's been so important to our franchise for the last decade, let's send him to a contending team. We can get a lot back in return from whoever, Philadelphia, Boston, name a team that, Dame Lillard's going to put over the top, or at least make a contender, rather than let's just get the best deal we can get and send him, like you said, to Cleveland or Oklahoma City or wherever. So, that
I just don't think you can operate like that. I mean, listen, Dame Lillard, obviously you appreciate him, but you have to be business focused and focused on the health of your franchise. And like you said, if it's a free agent destination, then it's one thing. Okay, maybe you handle it a little bit more deferential. But since it's not, and Portland isn't, I think, like you said, Seth, you have to maximize the value. If you're sending him to a team that he has no chance of winning on, that's sort of tough luck, Dame Lillard. You requested the trade. We didn't want to trade you, but you're sort of forcing our hand here. We have to do what's best for the team. So I think that's something that could happen, Sap. I know I said two more, but this is my last question for you on the Lillard front.
Well, before you go there, I just want to compare it to something that happened in hockey 20 years ago. So not too often that we have a basketball hockey, comparison. But the
this
Bruins,
is where you lose me typically.
Sometimes, because I know you're an expert in goaltending, but the rest of the sport you don't really follow. But Ray Bourque was here for nearly 2 decades, and late in his career, they moved him to Colorado. He was able to win a Stanley Cup. But at that point, Ray Bourque was 38 years old, and he was a legend here and had a great relationship with ownership. It's just a matter of the Bruins weren't close to winning a cup. He wanted to try to win a cup. He got to Colorado, won the title. That's a different situation where you acquiesce to that veteran player and say, yeah, we'll trade you to this contending team because, we'd love to see you win a cup. We're going into a total rebuild. This is different for Portland because Dame Lillard's only
at the
31.
Peak of his value too.
He's 31
so
years old.
Obviously wasn't at the peak of his value.
No.
Lillard, this is the highest value Lillard has ever had, I would say, right?
Yeah, other than the fact he's 31, that's the only knock against him. But he seems to be in phenomenal shape. He's durable, and he's coming off of arguably his best year. I mean, I know they got knocked out in the first round, but he had some games in that series that were just ridiculous.
It wasn't his fault.
No, I mean the team's not very good around him, so let's not hold that against him. Yeah, so that's a situation where the guy's old. let's move him to a contending team because, he's been so good for the franchise. Dame Lillard is still Portland's biggest asset by far. So they better get something back in return that's comparable to what he has to offer.
Okay, Sap, last question I mean it this time. Last question on the Lillard front. This is one for your Lakers.
Ooh.
Anthony Davis, Lillard, straight up. I think that's the only trade the Blazers would possibly accept to the Lakers. Would you do it?
No.
Well,
no, I wouldn't. Yeah, that's no, it. I just wouldn't. I mean, I love Dame Lillard. I do. Anthony Davis is more of an impactful player, again, because he's such a great defender. Now, he's not as dependable as Dame Lillard. We know how much Anthony Davis has missed throughout his career. Again, this year, I don't think he showed up to camp ready to play. I could kind of write that off because it was such a short offseason. So, as I said many times before, I'm hoping someone gets in Anthony Davis's head, and maybe it can be the great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who still looks like he could go out and play at 73 years old, stays in great shape. Maybe he can get in Anthony Davis's head and say, this is the time in your career when you're 28 and you've had injuries, you've got to take conditioning and diet much more seriously. Because if Anthony Davis is healthy, as great as Dame Lillard is, Anthony Davis is a better player, right? Because we're talking about 6'11" versus 6'1". We're talking about an elite defender against a guy in Dame Lillard who's, I think, a below average defender. So no, I wouldn't do it. I would hold on to Anthony Davis and just hope like hell that he takes conditioning more seriously and can fulfill his potential over the next 5 years with LeBron James.
Yeah, for any Lakers fans listening, it is the only mechanism to get Lillard to the Lakers. The only way.
Yeah. It's not Kyle Kuzma, Alex.
No, the Lakers roster sucks, Sap. It's two guys.
It's terrible.
They have nothing of value to other teams. I mean, I think a team would like Taylor Horton Tucker, but like they'd like him as like the seventh guy on the team.
Jet, they may have if you take the top two players off of every NBA team's roster, they may have the worst roster in the NBA. I mean, because their third best player was Dennis Schroeder, who's I think sucks.
The Celtics.
Yeah, it's not. You're right. I mean, at least the Celtics. I mean, I'll Marcus Smart's. I guess he's probably about as good as Dennis Schroeder. I mean, Robert Williams is probably as good as Kyle Kuzma. I don't know. Like, they don't have much after that. They were able to win the title because of LeBron, Anthony Davis. And then if you're going to have guys that aren't quite, the third best player on the team. I mean, every team has a third best player. It doesn't mean he's a real number three guy. But they better be veterans that understand their roles, and they're kind of like the way Milwaukee does it, or the way Phoenix does it with a Jay Crowder or someone like that who understands. Okay, this is I've got to play defense. I've got to hit the shot. I kind of know my role. You can't have a guy like Kyle Kuzma, whose opinion of himself is so through the roof, who actually isn't that good.
He could average 25 points a game in a season or something like that.
Sure, why not? Well, I mean, who was it? Vlade Divac said that Michael Jordan in today's NBA would have averaged 80 a game, which
Ooh.
That's interesting. That's a lot of points. I mean, I think MJ could have scored 40 a game in this NBA. 80 points. I mean, that's since MJ never scored 80 points in a game. There's only two guys in the history of the league ever scored 80 or more points in a game. One of them's Wilt Chamberlain. The other one's Kobe Bryant. But, Vlade, who was not exactly the best executive, maybe he's sipping a little bit too much wine.
No, he picked Bagley instead of Luka Doncic and Trae Young. That was a
great
good
move.
Pick.
Great move. Great move.
It was purely out of spite too, because he doesn't like Doncic's dad. So that's a good way to run a team.
Brilliant. Isn't that brilliant? I mean, he did pick De'Aaron Fox, right? So
yeah, okay.
That was a good choice.
Well, yeah. I mean, the Kings have taken over the mantle from the Clippers as the worst basketball team.
Yeah.
All right, Sap, we'll get into Team USA a little bit. That Dame Lillard actually took a transition because he is one of the members of Team USA, and Team USA is dropping like flies, Sap, right before the Olympics are about to start.
Man.
Bradley Beal, sucks for him. I feel terrible for him. He's going to miss the Olympics because he's got COVID. I shouldn't say that. He's in contact tracing. They don't say if he has COVID or not. I think we can pretty accurately say he has COVID because they're already ruling him out for the Olympics. So he's done. Kevin Love is withdrawing because he is admitting to the fact that everybody knew that he sucks and isn't able to play up to snuff for the Olympic team. And Jeremy Grant is in contact tracing too. So what Team USA did today was they added JaVale McGee off the street, seemingly, and Keldon Johnson, who's been playing with them on the select team, which is basically the team they scrimmage against. And they'll figure out if they need to replace Jeremy Grant or not. But Team USA obviously still the favorites. No matter what happens, they'll have Kevin Durant on the team and Dame Lillard, so they'll be the favorites with just those two guys. But this is not a good way to head into the Olympics, especially when you
No.
talk about they've lost 2 of the last 3 exhibition games to Australia and Nigeria. They blew out Argentina the other day, but they're sort of limping into this field that they were expected to dominate, Sap.
Yeah, I mean, they've won every gold medal since 2004. They lost the gold medal in 2004 when Argentina won it, and then the next 3 Olympics they just breezed through right in 08, 12, and 16. You
I don't
normally
believe they
have the
lost
best
a game.
players in the league. I mean, they had the best
play.
players there for the most part, right? I mean, you had in 8, you had LeBron and Kobe both at the height of their powers, and they could have put you and some other guy out there, and they were going to win the gold medal. In 12 and 16, the same thing. So we're expecting them to do the same thing in Tokyo. And the one thing I always want to put forth to people is a lot of folks will say, well, the world's catching up to us. Yes, the world is, but not one individual country is catching up to us. Right. I mean, so if you look at the 10 best players in the NBA, 4 are foreign-born players, right? You've got Giannis, Luka, Nikola Jokic, and Joel Embiid, right?
Yep.
Born in some other country besides the United States. That's 4 of the top 10 players in the league, but those 4 guys are all from 4 different countries. We still have by far the most talent.
No, it's a great point, Sap. That's a perfect way to describe it. The world is catching up, but not an individual country.
No, I mean, if I would like to see the All-Star game, the world versus the United States. I think that'd be terrific. Really fun. And look, Kyrie Irving and Ben Simmons, born in Australia, could play on the world team. Again, Kyrie could look at the map and see Australia's, way over to the right, down south, on that flat map of his, and he could represent Australia with Ben Simmons. But you'd have a phenomenal team. Right? Those 4 guys I just mentioned with Kyrie, Ben Simmons, Andrew Wiggins is from Canada, whatever. So you could put together a really great team from the world. We should still be the favorite, and I think we are. I'm questioning as much about, is Popovich the right coach for this? As much as we respect Popovich and think he's the greatest coach, maybe in the history of the sport, you're finding out that it's still about talent, right? I mean, we think Belichick's the greatest coach of the Super Bowl era, and he probably still is, but without Brady, it's a different dynamic. Well, Popovich without Duncan and without Kawhi, it's a different dynamic in San Antonio. And he's been more about the system, and he's very flexible though, right? I mean, the Spurs always had this system, but let's not forget the Spurs at first were a defensive team, then they became an offensive team, then they became a defensive team again. I think he's very flexible as a coach, but I just wonder if, he's trying to maybe implant that system a little too strongly on these guys. And look, these guys just wrapped up the postseason, 2-3 weeks ago? And, are they really in the right frame of mind to go play?
They're adding a couple guys who are still playing. Holiday, Booker, and Middleton are all committed to the team.
Now, whichever team loses in the finals, I think the player or players on that team will not go. Like if I'm Devin Booker and the Suns lose, I'm not going. I got to go get my nose, healing up. And you're going to be so down, you may not go. Middleton and Holiday, I think if they win, they're going to literally fly there without an airplane, because now they're going to be newly minted NBA champions. They may still be hungover from the celebration, or vice versa. I mean, if Phoenix wins, Booker's probably going to say, screw the broken nose. I'm going there to, stick it in everybody's face that I'm an NBA champion. I'm sure he has some sort of rivalry with Jason Tatum. I mean, they're essentially the same age. They're both great young players. They're probably friendly or friends, but they probably have some dynamic there where they're competitive against each other. So yeah, it's just JaVale McGee. Was he just in Vegas and they just saw him and said, come join us? I mean, can we not do better than JaVale McGee? Unless they just want some guys on the team that don't want to play, just going to sit there and be good guys. And McGee is that guy, right? Because he won back-to-back titles with Golden State. I thought played a nice role on the Lakers last year. Maybe he's the lucky charm. Might as well bring Danny Green with them as well. Guys that just constantly win. Maybe that will rub off on the team. That's got to be the only thing. Is JaVale McGee going to play a lot in the Olympics?
I think they play him. Some of the teams are pretty big that they're playing,
right.
And this is not a big team. Team USA.
No.
Listen, he's basically in there. He would be in there to block shots and commit fouls.
Right.
So no, he's not gonna. He wouldn't play a lot. You think, okay, take the 10, 12 best guys, and that's the team. But that typically doesn't work.
Right.
you need to have guys who play sort of different roles. That's why obviously Draymond Green is not one of the 12 best players in the world,
No.
but he's a perfect Olympic player because
Exactly.
he'll do the dirty work. Jeremy Grant, I thought was a great addition too. Now he might not play. Yeah, I mean, I still think they'll be fine ultimately, Sap. McGee is, yeah, I think will be the last guy off the bench, obviously. Keldon Johnson, people aren't very familiar with him because he plays in San Antonio and Popovich is the coach. So I think that, he took him, as kind of a favor to his player, and he's fine, but he won't play all that much either. They're basically, I think they're relying on their talent carrying them forward, and fortunately they have a lot of that. Who's going to really threaten them? Sap. Spain's not what they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
Slovenia, which is where Luka plays, is a one-man team. Australia, as you saw the other night, is very good. These teams. So the thing is, with these teams, none of them is going to be able to equal the talent of Team USA.
No.
That's just a fact. But they have been playing together for a very long time, and
Exactly.
Team USA has been playing together for about a week, with the exception of the guys who are teammates. Like Holiday, Middleton, they'll have chemistry with each other. But yeah, so I mean, it's a weird way to go in the Olympics. I wouldn't say bet the house on them winning, but I still think at the end of the day, they should be able to win the gold without that much of an issue. But it is a weird way to go into the Olympics with COVID and guys dropping out. It's not
Right.
a great thing.
No, and it's a weird season, right? Because here we are in the middle of July and we're still in the NBA Finals. We're literally a month deeper into the calendar than we normally are. So there's no gap for the players to catch their breath and then go to the trials and get the exhibition games in and then go to Tokyo. I mean, again, Middleton, Booker, Holiday are going to wrap up the NBA Finals, whether it be Tuesday or Thursday, and then get on a plane to Japan. That's not an easy thing to do. Also, I think the players that are there now are going to have to get used to how international basketball is. Much slower whistle, right? So now you've got guys out there that normally could get to the line 10, 12, 14 times a game if they so choose, whether it's, Kevin Durant or Jason Tatum or Dame Lillard. They can get to the line whenever they want in the NBA. Well, international rules, they're not blowing whistles like they do in the NBA. I mean, you're not going to see players, kicking their legs out and getting 3 free throws. It just doesn't happen in international play. I mean, you saw the games against Nigeria and Australia where the players are like, what do you mean there's no foul there? I got touched, and the referee's like, play on. This is international play. So
right.
I think
they also don't have a
that
relationship with the officials as they do in the NBA.
And
these
you don't think
international referees. They're FIBA
Jet,
referees. They're not NBA referees.
And this is not 1992 where everybody was in awe of the Dream Team. I mean, that was literally a joke. I mean, there were guys were getting posted up by Charles Barkley yelling over to the bench, take a picture of me. I'm being posted up by Charles Barkley. I mean, it was as if like, a house musician all of a sudden ran into the Beatles. They were going to be intimidated by them. I think there's still a level of respect for these NBA players, but the guys on Nigeria or Australia, they weren't intimidated by the NBA players because each of those countries have 5 or 6 guys that play in the NBA. I mean, they're not great players, but they do play in the NBA. So they're not intimidated. And certainly the officials aren't intimidated. If anything, you know how officials are. They'll look back and say, I don't care if you're Kevin Durant, Jason Tatum, or Dame Lillard. I'm not calling a foul because we don't call fouls like that in international play. So that's something they're going to have to adapt to. And again, I just question if Popovich is the right guy for this.
Well, who would you prefer? Obviously, I know you always would prefer Monty Williams.
Monty Williams, yeah, he's kind of
not available right now.
No,
so who would you?
Well,
why did Coach K work? Why did Coach K work better than Popovich?
Coach K, I think, because the way college basketball is, where players are coming in and out, that he became. This is what makes Coach K a great coach, and I'm not a big fan of Coach K. I think Duke is, the snobbiest program maybe in the history of college basketball. UCLA was pretty snobby in the late 60s, early 70s as well. But he's adaptable, right? So he changed the way he recruited at Duke, understanding that there were going to be a lot of one and dones. Duke used to always recruit and have players for 3 or 4 years, whether it was Leitner or Grant Hill, they did that. But there came a point where Coach K understood, okay, I'm going to get one and done, so I've got to adapt. And I think that made him the right guy for this. I also think Popovich, does he not seem old to you now? Like he just seems like he's always been kind of an irascible, cranky guy. he really seems to be that now at 72 or 73.
Right.
I know he lost his wife a few years ago. That's got to be hard for him to deal with. Maybe he's coaching because of that, to stay busy rather than sit and stew about losing his wife. So I think there's a lot in play there. They've got assistant coaches there, including Ime Udoka, who's one of the assistant coaches. Now currently the Celtics head coach. So yeah, I mean, I don't think you're going to lose the Olympics because of Greg Popovich. I would never say that, but I wonder if he's quite the right guy for this. Who else would be? I mean, Doc Rivers, I think, would probably be the right guy. Although somehow he'd blow the gold medal game after being up by 17 in the third quarter.
Yeah, I mean, I still expect them to win. Sap. Their group in the group stage is them, Czech Republic, France, who's okay but not great, and Iran. So
yeah, they should be okay. Yeah.
If you're looking at the FIBA rankings right now, USA is the top ranked team. Spain is second. Australia is third. Argentina is fourth. So, you look at, let's look at Spain. They've been there. It's not the same Spain team that you're used to. Pau Gasol's not on the team anymore. Marc Gasol is old. Their best players, probably Ricky Rubio. I mean, they should be able to crush all these teams. That being said, these guys on Spain have played together for 10 years. And it's so it's a chemistry versus talent thing. Can Team USA develop enough chemistry in 2 weeks to be able to win the gold medal? I'd say yes.
Yeah, absolutely. But I also think that these other countries, it seems like they play with more national pride than, say, the NBA players from the United States. To me, the NBA players from the United States are kind of there to appease their sneaker companies as much as anything. So there's a different dynamic there. Hey, maybe they got to bring Carmelo Anthony back. He's won 3 gold medals. Why not?
Good at it. Very good at winning gold medals.
That's his claim to fame. He's never played in an NBA Finals. Might be actually the greatest player to never play in an NBA Finals. But he's money when it comes to winning gold medals. Why not? I mean, they got JaVale McGee on the team and Keldon Johnson. I mean, I barely had ever heard of him. So why not Carmelo Anthony?
Yeah. All right, Sap. Well, that's going to do it for us here at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jed and Sap. We are, as always, presented by Full Press Coverage. Got your latest stuff on Dame, on Team USA. We'll continue to follow, obviously, both those stories as they continue to develop. And we'll be back for reaction this weekend with the NBA Finals as it continues, as it's knotted up at 2 games apiece. So make sure you stay tuned for that, and you check out both of our Twitters at JohnSap25, at Jet Stryer, and you can find our podcast wherever podcasts are found or on YouTube at youtube.com/Jet Stryer. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll talk to you later. See ya.